welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative. I'm Tom Martin, your co-host. I'm a lifelong journalist. I produce many stories for Diane Sawyer at ABC Good Morning America, Charles Kuralt at CBS News Sunday Morning, numerous folks at CNN. And I love asking questions. I love expanding my own knowledge. And I feel very, very fortunate to be able to have these conversations with the great author, David Parker. And David is the author of Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative. And he is joining us from San Francisco. Hey, David, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you, Tom.
Great to see you, sir. So it's interesting. We were just recently speaking about Andrew Carnegie. I know that you are really a scholar at heart. And it's interesting because both of your books, Income and Wealth and the San Francisco Conservative, have many footnotes. And so sometimes I'm tempted to say they're scholarly. And one of our friends, our friend Dia, recently corrected me and said they're not really scholarly, or I guess they are scholarly, but they're informed by your experience. You have many decades of working in business as an entrepreneur, as an investor. How does that, change the way that you look at some of these historical figures, somebody like Andrew Carnegie, for example?
Well, if I get fascinated by somebody, I look into it. And I mentioned maybe in the last podcast that I read 800 pages by one author on whose name is Nassau, New York University, on Andrew Carnegie, and he's an academic, and I'm scholarly, but it's scholarly writing from an entrepreneurial mind. So I picked up on all kinds of stuff in the book that fortunately the author mentioned, but didn't go on, didn't expand on, because he didn't, after all his 800 pages, he doesn't understand Andrew Carnegie at all. And as a person who's in the trenches, as I think you said, with my thumb is on the pulse of the economy. I'm an investor on a pretty large scale. So I picked up on all kinds of things, because doing 4 careers simultaneously, I didn't have time to waste. So on each one of my careers, I focused on what is really the essence of what it is I'm doing. So I'm used to focusing like that. And this author talked about the idiosyncrasies of Andrew Carnegie, that people were laughing at him, and that he said, that's not important. Every human being has idiosyncrasies. Just look at what he did and what he said. No one cares about the idiosyncrasies. And so he wrote Andrew Carnegie, The Gospel of Wealth and Empire of Business. He didn't even talk about those books. And those books were so revealing about timeless economic truths, timeless laws of nature, timeless laws of money. And Carnegie grasped those things. And he, come here at 18 years old with no money or no contacts, no college education, probably hardly a high school education. And in 10 years, he's the richest man in the world on today's standards. Richer than Bezos, anybody, because he just grasped what was really at the fundamental, what was at the bottom of everything. And so I do that in music, and I do that in my writing, and I do that in my teaching, and I do that in what's left, business.
Sure.
My jazz music. I don't know what it is.
Sure.
So
I was just thinking. I think I've mentioned to you in the past how I enjoy being a member of a little book club. We get on phone calls together, 4 of us, and we've been reading aloud, taking turns reading aloud different books about money and finance and whatnot. And so not long ago, we took turns reading Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he was a contemporary, sort of a student under, so to speak.
Right, he was.
Andrew Carnegie. He had access to Andrew Carnegie. Like, how did you do this? How did you become so successful? And in one of his chapters of that book, I think he talks about something called a mastermind. And I enjoy participating in a mastermind group. There's like a guy who owns some chiropractic businesses. There's a realtor, guy owns a company that produces big construction equipment and so on. And what I'm sort of getting from them, hopefully it's rubbing off on me. And I know everything I'm learning from you is rubbing off on me here. But basically, they were saying if you can speak to others who have been in the trenches, as I like to say, they can help you solve problems. You can speed up success. Some people think, well, I really need to work really hard. Maybe if I work 80 hours a week, maybe if I work 100 hours a week. But then we're reminded of that old saying, work smarter, not harder. And I was just wondering, it is interesting. You have these 4 or 5 different careers that are simultaneous. And again, you've told us how sometimes what you've learned as a jazz musician, you can bring to a conversation, to a negotiation for a business investment or property purchase. What do you think about that idea of, a mastermind and then working smarter, not harder?
The mastermind it's a strange expression, but if you have the most fundamental vision, that's the person with the mastermind. That whatever you're dealing, this is what that is. If you're dealing in real estate, for example, real estate is about square footage. It can be industrial, it can be land, it can be office, it can be commercial. It's about square footage. And it could be about location, but if you're buying in less than a good location, you compensate for that. If I'm dealing with music, my band is, they're great musicians. I'm not the best in my band, but I know what pieces to play when, and that they don't. They says, let's play this. And I say, no, we're not. That's the wrong piece at the wrong time. So I have that ability to get to the bottom. And I've been able to predict, which has been reinforcing in my belief what I'm talking about. Some of my predictions were like instantaneously, and that's my teaching has been that way, and my jazz is that way, and my writing is that way. It drives my editor nuts. I don't have an outline. I don't have a master plan. I just write spontaneously. And at the end of the day, I may have been a complete waste, but by putting in that 5 hours a day of writing, the last sentence might have been the sentence I need. And that's what it took to get that one sentence to start the next day, which might have produced the whole page. But you have to stick it out with some persistence, and you have to go with some flow, some consciousness, some in the moment. So when I hear something, I write on political economy because I have you realize I have an intuition for it, intuition for business and intuition for political economy. When Donald Trump announced in 2015, I'm going to run for president, everybody laughed. I was in the room. And I said, it just popped out of my mouth. He won. Everybody laughed. On the eve of the election, there were some polls showing 90% for Hillary. I says, he won. There's no question in my mind. And he did. In the 2008 financial crisis, people were worried. Banks were committing fraud like crazy, and the economy went into a recession. I says the recession was going to last for 10 years, and the recovery will take another 10 years, 20 years to recover from this recession, because the government is stepping in for one instead of just letting it self-correct. But the fraud was so deep, and interest rates are going to be close to zero for 20 years, and the economy is going to go at a very slow pace. And I was essentially correct. That's 2008 at the beginning, before anybody knew anything. And that's how long it took. For 2018, things are okay. And we're still recovering from it. The Fed shouldn't be raising interest rates too high. We haven't recovered from that 2008 financial crisis, which we would have recovered in 2 years from had we just done a little austerity. And I wrote an article in the Economist, and the Economist published it in a letter to the editor, alongside the Prime Minister, the economic advisor to the Prime Minister of England, both me and him. Austerity for 2 years and it's over. And oh no, we can't let people suffer. We're progressives. So okay, 20 years, and I knew that was going to be, and it was.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I just want to throw in real quick, and I have a follow-up question to what you just said there, but if you're joining us midstream here, I just want to let our viewers, our listeners know that this is a San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series. I'm Tom Martin, your co-host, asking hopefully thought-provoking questions of my colleague, co-host, main attraction here, David Parker, who's author of Income and Wealth and a San Francisco conservative. And you were just speaking about sort of that prolonged pain because people, made some really bad decisions. And I was reminded of what you've written about FDR and the Great Society and the Great Depression. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Right. Recessions are normally 2 years, and depressions are normally 4 years. And you can take a timeline back to the 1700s, maybe even worldwide. The only time in the history of the world, I think, that a depression lasted 8 or 10 years is the American-US Depression. And that's for one reason. And you could say Franklin Roosevelt caused the Depression, the Great Depression, single-handedly, because we had a stock market crash in 1928, and we had a depression, 29, 30, 31, 32, a real depression. Roosevelt campaigned in 32. This is what I'm going to do to take us out of the depression. And he was so anxious to do those programs, he ran them through the Supreme Court and got it into place without looking that the depression was over in 1933. You can look at the graph, whoop, right back up to normal again. He should have just done nothing. The depression was over. But when he threw in those programs and started government spending and deficit spending, the depression turned down and went deeper. It went from 15% unemployment to 25% unemployment, and then stayed between 15 and 25 up until World War II, when we spent so much money that it brought us out of the depression. But
interesting.
It caused it all. Yes. And a lot of economists have argued that the depression had been careers built on describing and finding the cause of the Great Depression of America. And Paul Krugman himself, who's a Nobel economist, he admitted that we caused the depression. Roosevelt caused the depression. The most progressive person out there. So a huge mistake. The war on poverty, another huge mistake. Poverty was 15% in 64. Lyndon Johnson says it's unconscionable that a nation as wealthy as the US have a 15% poverty rate, and we're going to end that once and for all. We're fighting a war in Vietnam with a huge budget deficit. I don't care. We're going to end poverty once and for all. And the needle hasn't budged from 1964 to this day. On average, some years lower, some years higher. It's a tiny bit lower right now because we're coming out of a COVID recession. Everybody's working. Just a little bit lower, that's all. And we have a deficit of 23 trillion just for the war on poverty that's just sitting there waiting to ruin the country. You can't solve people's problems for them. Problems are all personal. It's just, that's one of my, and all taxes are paid for by the middle class. The poor are not paying taxes, and the rich are not paying taxes. You can't get it from them. And so that's why we have a budget deficit. Social Security and Medicare are all paid for by borrowing now. It's not enough. We're not taxing the middle class 50 to 70% like we should. We should be driving the middle class, which is 90% of the nation, back to the Middle Ages, and it will solve our problems.
I want to follow up on a couple of things you said. It's like a bucket of cold water there. Like, stop thinking like this. Yeah.
You ask me a question, you're going to regret it. Okay.
I'm learning. I'm taking mental notes here. Oh my God. Actually, what comes to mind for me, I mean, I'm not in the role of a policymaker or anything like that, obviously, but when again, I do follow the news. I'm kind of a political news junkie. That's how I got my start, in Washington, D.C. back in the 1980s. And so I've noticed, and I tend to get a lot of my news these days from CNN, I will admit that. And so some recent coverage said, thank goodness that Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona, I believe it is, fell in line. We have this split Senate and they were acting more like Republicans. And we were worried that President Joe Biden has these massive, huge budgeted, programs. And thank God they fell in line and they passed it. And so they said it hasn't been since FDR that we've had such a huge package of policies, policy changes. Good for you, Joe Biden. It's like, wait a minute. And that thought brought to mind again, our friend Dia, sent me a note recently. She said, hey, Tom, I came across this article in the Business Insider website, and they said maybe historians should gather at the White House every year, perhaps, because I noticed one of our great historians, great writer, David McCullough, died recently, and he wrote about many presidents and so on. And when they were interviewing another, no disrespect to her, she's a lady, but Doris Kearns Goodwin, a great historian, I've heard her interviewed all my life. And she said, yeah, we used to get together. Historians would come to the White House and we'd talk. And maybe, I don't know when the last time that happened, but what do you think of that idea of historians gathering at the White House? Because you don't want to repeat a mistake like that, right?
My writing is based on the great ideas of 5th century Athens. That's 2,500 years ago. 1st century Rome at its best, 2,000 years ago, and the Age of Enlightenment, that's 200 years ago. Those were 3 great periods, and they all had similar themes. They all talk similar as we're talking. You read Aristotle, and they didn't tell you it's Aristotle. When was that written? He's talking about the same stuff we're talking about and talking about it in the same way. Yeah, historians should come to the White House and say that FDR and the War on Poverty, the New Deal, the War on Poverty, and the Affordable Care Act, those are just big government programs paid for by borrowing. And why don't you announce that to the population? If they say that's okay, that's different, but not if they don't know that they're going to pay for it.
It's like giving them a Christmas present. They don't realize it comes with a price tag.
It's pure politics. It's pure politics because the Democrats are up for election in this year. They got to do something that looks like what Democrats do. Spend a lot of money. Republicans don't want to spend a lot of money. They just spend a medium amount of money. If they spend just as badly, the Democrats are willing to spend a lot of money and never say who's paying for it. This country's not going to collapse because we're going to do what Greece did to get out of the euro crisis, which I also predicted in 2010. There's no crisis. Germany will not let Greece default and destroy the euro because Germany is a big currency manipulator. They got out of the Deutschmark. That's why we have the euro today, because Deutschmark would be way high valued and nobody would be buying German products. But have Germany with a euro, have flunky countries have their currency. In Germany, they can't compete with Germany.
Yeah,
that's why we have the euro, the eurozone. It's Germany's economic conquest of Europe without the military. No one talks like that. But they're not going to let Greece wreck the euro. They'll bail them out. And the euro never fell in price during the whole crisis. When I said that, everybody says, "Ooh, I guess you're right," and I was. But Greece solved their huge sovereign debt and budget deficit by cutting Social Security payments in half. Bam. And I was in Greece in 2012, and I was talking to teachers, and they says, politicians ran for office by saying they're going to increase Social Security. They're going to increase social spending everywhere. And we all said, and we got big checks coming in the mail. So we all laughed. And so when they cut it in half, nobody said boo, because everybody knew they didn't deserve it. So we're paying Social Security and we're paying Medicare, healthcare way more than we should be paying because the money is not there for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So that's gonna get cut. That's what I'm saying. It's gonna get cut.
yeah. No, it's you are a great prognosticator. That's for sure. Proven. So I'm sure you're going to be right about that also. So, well, I think we're out of time for this episode, but again, I learned a lot, and you definitely pushed us all to engage in that deeper level of thinking. It's like, don't stop on the superficial level here. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, you better cut me off quick. Before I trash everything. All right.
This is a mind expanding conversation, no question. So as we head out of here, I just want to remind our listeners, our viewers, to be sure to pick up copies of David's books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative. And you can do that by visiting his website, davidparkeressays.com, or by going to Amazon. So thanks, David. It was great to see you.
Thank you too.